You're watching the 10,000 Unique, and today we're going to be discussing social classes and Marxism. Let's go. Now remember, this video assumes no prior knowledge, so it's very simple. I'll teach you everything from the beginning, even if you know nothing. So here we are. In Marxism, in modern society, we say that there are two social classes, or main social classes. There is the bourgeoisie, or aka a capitalist, and the proletariat, aka a worker. Now, what makes someone a member of the bourgeoisie, or what makes them a member of the proletariat? Well, to be a member of the proletariat, you have to work for a living. So, for example, if you are a bus driver, you get up at 9 every morning, you go to work for 7 or 8 hours, you come back, and you receive a wage, and that wage is what you live on. Then you are a member of the proletariat, you are a worker. What you've done is you have sold your labour, you driving the bus, and in return you have received a wage, which you then use on yourself and your family. The bourgeoisie, however, do not have to sell their labour. What makes somebody a member of the bourgeoisie is that they own the means of production. Here. Now, what is the means of production? The means of production would be the bus company, let's say. So, the bourgeoisie here owns a bus company in a major city like London, and the proletariat drives that bus for him. The bourgeoisie does not drive any of the buses that he owns. Then, when the worker is done at the end of the day, he'll give let's say he'll give half or 2/3 of his wage to the bourgeoisie and keep the last third of the wage for himself as his wages. So the bourgeoisie is making a lot of money out of all his bus drivers while not working, but because he owns the means of production, the bus company. So what makes somebody a member of the bourgeoisie? Well, you have to own the means of production, hire people to work on it, and take surplus value. Surplus value is profit made by the bus driver from being paid for driving the bus, but is not given to him in his wage. So, for example, he might make £500 sold in bus tickets, but he only gets to keep 100 of it, while 400 of it goes to the bourgeoisie. And a certain amount of it will go to running the bus company, but a lot of it will go to paying this member of the bourgeoisie, the person who owns the buses. So let's move on to what Marxists think of how these social classes relate to the state, the government. So in modern Britain we are what's called a capitalist country. We run an economic system called capitalism in which this is the primary way that things work. We have a bourgeoisie who owns companies like Virgin Media or Bayer or Tesco's or Asda, and you'll have large business men and women owning that, who are taking surplus value from their workers, the proletariat who work at the tills, who work in the factories or the labs. But it hasn't always been this way. Capitalism is actually very new, only 300 years old. If we go back into the past in Britain, before the English Civil War, we will find an economic system called feudalism, in which you would have a lord who runs a portion of land, and serfs who work on it. But the serfs are not paid a wage, they are paid in being able to live on the land, and they have to get permission from the lord if they want to go somewhere, and the lord is expected to look after them. And that's feudalism. And if we go back even further than that, we will see slavery, such as in ancient Greek and Roman societies, in which the primary way that things work is we have a slave owner and the slaves that work for him. And if we go back even further than that, we will find tribal society, in which there are no social classes. In fact, people live in tightly knit tribal and family groups, and they all work for each other. Maybe jobs are divided by what somebody is capable of, or maybe their sex, if they're male or female, but that's pretty much it. What defines tribal society, however, is that there is no state. So why do we have a state? Well, the bourgeoisie needs a way of keeping in control of the proletariat. We're talking about modern capitalism right now. So in Britain, police officers would do this very well. If the proletariat were working against the interests of the bourgeoisie, such as organising unions and strikes, going as far as to take control of their factory or organising a general strike, then the police will conspire to stop that. That is the primary function of the state in this society, is to protect capitalism. Of course, the police do things such as stopping murders and stopping rapes, but that is their secondary purpose. Their primary purpose is to protect the economic system in which society lives on. So blacklisting is a very good example. In Britain, we have what's called a blacklist, in which employers will name and share the information of their workers that have been organising unions or strikes or damaging the interest of the bourgeoisie. And these workers who are blacklisted find it very hard to find jobs in the future because their employers are sharing the names and they don't want to hire anybody who would unionise and organise the workers. If we go even further back to feudalism, we will find knights. Now, any serf or peasant that refuses the will of the lord or doesn't want to work on the land for the lord will quickly find the knight will persuade the peasant otherwise. And if we go back even further to Roman society, which was a slave society, their economic system was slavery, you will find centurions. Now, if any slave dared to rebel against their slave master, then they'd find the centurion would persuade them otherwise or kill them. Now, these aren't the only modes of production. There is one other, but it's very young and it's still in its development stage, called socialism. Now, the first socialist revolution that was successful in taking state power and destroying the bourgeoisie was the October Revolution in Russia, or what would later become the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was the first state to practice socialism, this new economic system. What made it different, however, was that the proletariat held state power and the bourgeoisie were the oppressed class, or almost non-existent. So the state was acting in the interests of the proletariat, the working class, rather than the bourgeoisie, the capitalists. So now the proletariat are holding state power, and the state is acting in the interest of the proletariat. If any bourgeoisie who wanted to sabotage socialism or get in the way, they would quickly find Chica agents knocking at their door, and they'd probably find themselves in a gulag. Any working class person in Britain that dares to actually challenge capitalism and is successful in doing so will find themselves in a private prison. Any serf in medieval Britain that found themselves in antagonism to their lord or wanted their own land and didn't want to serve the lord would find the knights would send them to a dungeon. And in slavery, if Roman slavery, let's say, if any slave dared to rebel against their slave owners, then they would also find themselves in a dungeon. So how does it change? How do these different social classes come into power? We're using Britain as an example because my videos are designed primarily for British people and other English-speaking countries. In Britain, capitalism was built after the English Civil War. So we have feudalism before the English Civil War, but then comes along the parliamentary army who challenge feudalism, and they eventually topple feudalism, they topple the lords of the manor, the various aristocracy, then they build a state that is in the interests of the capitalists. But large industrial capitalists like we see today didn't exist back then, the technology didn't exist. Instead we had very wealthy merchants. So the state is acting in the interest of these merchants. And then later on we'll hit the 17 and 1800s and the science is developed for capitalism. The science capable of large machinery and workhouses is capable, it exists then. And so that develops as science develops and we get to modern day capitalism. So if you want some examples of both capitalism and socialism, let's look at some examples from the present and the past. If you want to look at capitalism today, you can see practically all of North America, United States, Canada, Mexico, Germany, France, Israel, South Korea. Now, many socialist states that did exist have now dissolved. They succumbed to counter-revolution and sabotage. And many socialist states are in the process of being made. There are communist rebellions happening all over the globe in the Philippines, India, Colombia, Ecuador. But if we want some past examples of socialist states in which the proletariat held state power, the most famous examples is the USSR, or the Soviet Union. We could also look at China, Vietnam, East Germany, etc. there goes it for the end of my video. That was my video on Marxist theory, the state, social classes, and history. Now, if you want some good reading material by socialists themselves, or Marxists on the theory, if you want to go into more detail, remember this is a very generalized, in a nutshell video, then I recommend Lenin, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, and there will be a website in the description below where you can read it online for free. And also I recommend The Foundations of Leninism by Joseph Stalin, which I highly recommend. I've read both of these books and I can recommend them. And there will also be a link in the description to a website in which you can read it for free. And also a link to a place where you can buy the books if you want them physically. This has been the 10,000 League. Like, rate and subscribe for more videos on revolutionary theory, history and politics. Goodbye.